Hi guys, welcome to Less is More. My name is Dan Wellman and today we'll be looking at a few other basic features of Less. So far in the series we've looked at variables, which if you've used any kind of programming language whatsoever you'll instantly feel comfortable with and understand completely. And in the last part we looked at how nesting can be used instead of the traditional cascade, which is another simple but fundamental feature of Less. Before we get into some of the more advanced stuff, we're just going to cover the last of the basics that you should probably be aware of when using Less. So first we'll look at comments. So Less supports regular CSS comments in this kind of format. And CSS comments like this will be preserved when they're compiled. So you might have noticed that our CSS file only contains this comment, which is added by the application. So Less itself does support CSS comments. It's just that because the CSS is being minified, the comments are being stripped out. So if we turn off minification and just crunch that one more time, then yeah, the CSS comments are preserved. So we'll just stick that back on. And as you can see, Less also supports a JavaScript style comment. These comments are not preserved when the file is compiled. They will always be stripped out. So those are useful for leaving comments in our Less files, which will never make it into the CSS. Less also supports simple string escaping. You can escape a string by starting it with the tilde character. So the tilde character obviously is that. So if we wanted to escape a string, we could just do something like this. And when we want to use that, we just use the variable as we would. And if we crunch that and then take a look at class, yeah, okay, so the tilde has escaped the string and that's turned it into a non-string. So obviously if we did actually want to use it as part of a content style, then we wouldn't need to escape it because the content style is always quoted anyway. So yeah, it's gone back to a string. So that's what its escaping does, and as you'll see a bit later on it can be very, very useful, but for now just be aware that it's a feature of the language that we can use. So while we're talking about string values, another feature of Less that we may want to make use of is string interpolation, where special characters are used to signify portions of the string that should be replaced at compile time. This is useful when the value you assign to a variable is in string format but needs to be nested within a larger string. So for example, if we wanted to join two strings and use the resulting string as the value of a content property, we couldn't just use a variable alone. For example, if we wanted to join two strings and use the resulting string as the value of a content property, then we couldn't just use a variable alone. So if we tried to do something like this, and let's just say we want to add the characters ing, so we couldn't just do that. So yeah, okay, so that's what we expect because we aren't using a variable called myStringIng. Okay, so let's try something else. So okay, let's do that instead. Yeah, okay, that might work. Except that yeah, it doesn't. That's not like no CSS I ever saw before. Okay, so yeah, that failed. So okay, maybe we want to, I don't know, add some quotes around the string here. Yeah, okay, maybe that's going to work. Let's try that instead. Oh, okay, so that's not worked either. So in fact, it's even worse than before because we haven't even got the content of the variable now. It's just a literal string. So yeah, that sucks. So okay, we'll just use the interpolation feature of Less instead. Okay, so what we want to do here now is surround the part of the string that is going to be replaced with curly braces. And we can remove that space there. So we still keep it in quotes. And when we compile that now, yeah, okay, so that's exactly what we want. So that's how useful string interpolation can be. Obviously that's just a very basic, silly example, but we will use that a bit later on as well. So bear in mind that it exists and it can be very useful. Just like with regular CSS, we can also use imports with less. So we can import either CSS files, and we would do that exactly as we would expect. Okay, so we've got to make sure that if we're importing a CSS file, we use the CSS file extension. And we can also import less files. So we could do this. And that would import the less file, and all of the variables and mix-ins defined within the file that we're importing would now be available throughout this file. And we don't even need to use the less extension either. So if we're importing a less file, then we can just do that. So in this part we looked at a few of less's basic but sometimes important features that we should be aware of, even if we don't make use of them every day. They are capabilities and features of the language, so I thought it best to at least mention them. You can judge for yourself how useful you find them to be when you're actually using less on a regular basis. In the next part we'll look at another basic feature of less: operations. Thanks for watching.